He's one of today's most celebrated scholars of military affairs. He has a forthcoming book about the Vietnam War called The Road Not Taken. A staunch conservative, he advised John McCain during his 2008 presidential campaign and David Petraeus during the surge in Iraq. But it was a personal essay that Boot wrote recently that inspired me to ask him to come on to GPS again and talk about it. So Max, I listed your very impressive credentials.
Thanks for the nice build-up.
And your very American-sounding name.
Yes.
Because you began that essay by saying, people who know you professionally, and know your books, know your writing, know your appearances, they think of you as a regular all-American guy. But in fact, you came to America when you were 6 years old as a Russian immigrant who couldn't speak a word of English.
Correct. And I thought I'd done a reasonably good job of assimilating. I don't have an accent. There's no obvious tip-off that I wasn't born around these parts. But the essay that I wrote was really about the fact that Donald Trump is making me feel like a foreigner for the first time in my life, and what I have always thought of as my very own country. But he's making me feel like an outsider, a Russian, a Jew, an immigrant, anything but kind of a normal mainstream American, because of the way that he is dividing us and balkanizing us and seems to be catering to this white nationalist agenda.
I don't think I've ever seen a sentence of yours that started by saying, as a Russian Jew, here are my views on the Iraq surge, right?
Exactly.
You've never used your identity to advance yourself or in some way color your commentary. But now you feel like, you feel that identity more acutely because you're suddenly being told that's how I want to define you.
Well, that's very much the message I'm getting from Trump, when he is refusing to unequivocally condemn the white supremacist in Charlottesville, when he's pardoning the racist former Sheriff Joe Arpaio, and when he's deporting potentially 800,000 Dreamers from this country. It feels like there is an us and a them, and I'm not part of the us anymore somehow, even though I always thought I was. I think that is one of the most pernicious consequences of these Trump policies. Just to give you one data point, I've lived in this country for more than 40 years now, and I have never really been exposed to any kind of sustained anti-Semitism until last year, when all of a sudden, simply because I'm opposing Donald Trump, I'm getting deluged with anti-Semitic filth online and Twitter and email and so forth. And of course, I was hardly alone in this. Almost anybody who had any kind of vaguely Jewish-sounding name was all of a sudden being on the receiving end of all this hatred, which presumably has been out there in the past. But it just feels like Trump has given a license for these people to come out of the woodwork and to express their views more openly in a way that they did not do before.
When you came here, you didn't speak English. Do you have memories of, at that very young age, trying to assimilate, what it felt like?
I was somebody who was eager to assimilate. I, wanted to shed my foreign identity and become an American. And as a result of that, for better or for worse, I don't speak Russian today. I don't have any real ties to Russia. I feel very American. I feel this is the only country I've ever known. And yet at the same time, I'm just taken aback by understanding that there's these 800,000 Dreamers out there. And for them, it's also the only country they've ever known. And it just, it's very chilling for me to try to put myself into their shoes and to think about what would happen in my case. I'm 48 years old. What happens if I get deported to Russia, a land I don't know, a language I don't speak, people I have never met, and forced to survive there, and especially with the threat, presumably, of political persecution, since I've been less than a fan of Vladimir Putin and his government. But for me, that's a theoretical concern, because mercifully, my parents received refugee status and I became a citizen. So I'm not worried in my case that I'm actually going to get kicked out of this country. But, for 800,000 individuals, it's just, it's a terrifying prospect. And now they have to wait and see if Republicans in Congress will somehow resist the nativist sentiments in their own party to give them some protection, which I certainly hope would happen. But it's something that they would have to be extremely worried about right now.
And I think we should all be worried about the larger point that you're making. What does it do to the character of the country, to not just the 800,000, but to the other 300 odd million of us?
Exactly, and it's especially chilling to hear people like Steve Bannon and Steve Miller with Bannon having been one of the most influential people in the White House, and Miller's still there, and they're saying, we're not a nation of immigrants. I mean, Miller is saying, repudiating the Emma Lazarus poem on the base of the Statue of Liberty about give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses. They're saying, no, that's not what we're about. Well, I beg to differ. This is the country that I've known. This is the country I think most of us have known. And this, in fact, is what America has been about for well over 200 years. And it seems to me that these guys, with Donald Trump's acquiescence and sometimes active support, are bent on this very radical project of redefining American identity in these white nationalist terms, which I think are very threatening to everybody. It should be threatening to everybody. Even if you're actually a WASP, you should be threatened by this, but I think it's doubly threatening if you're not a WASP.
Max Boot, pleasure to have you on.
Thank you.
And we will be back.